But now I'm going to jump into the fraud. I hope most of you, or I think most of you, have probably seen these drawings. This was in my textbook when I was a kid, and it has to do with embryology, looking at embryos and how similar they are. And we have, again, it's a cartoon. They're not going to show real pictures in these textbooks. And they have a fish, an amphibian, a reptile, a bird, and a human. And just look how similar they look in the early stages. Just wow, we're so much like those other creatures that evolution could have happened, according to Ernst Haeckel, a Nazi German scientist who believed that it was the earlier life stages that changes happened to create different creatures. And so something happened in the womb, and instead of becoming fish, we started becoming humans, and that's why we look so similar. And it also used to say that we had gills and stuff, but we don't. Humans don't ever have gills at any point in their development, ever. We never do. That was a lie. Some of you were probably told that, like I was. We don't. We never have gills. But you'll see words like this. It says the fact that early development, they use the word fact quite a bit, of fish, birds, and humans is similar indicates that these animals share a common ancestor. Again, common ancestor, not creator, but they're saying the fact that they look similar. And here's more pictures. I've gone through. You can take these. These are in science books today. But here's the guy that made them, Ernst Haeckel, 1800s is when he was drawing these things up. Over 100 years ago, this guy was drawing this. Look at his drawing. Look how similar they look. More similar than the books. The books are kind of changing them a little bit. But when you investigate them and look at real photos, embryologists came along with actual photos and revealed, if you look at the bottom of the newspaper, the very bottom row, that's what they actually look like. That's how different they are. They are so much more, there's so much more characteristics that are not similar than those that are. See if I can make it a little bigger. There you go. So the embryos on the bottom, those are actual photos, and the ones on the row above it at the exact same stage, this is what Ernst Haeckel drew. He basically just hit copy and paste before it was cool and made all of his drawings, and then took credit away from the creator in making life. And so he lied, and it's been proven a hoax. And it was proven a hoax decades ago, as soon as they started taking photos of these things. And so there you go. It's a bigger image right there. So you can see what they really look like. But again, a hoax from over 100 years ago, you think it would be long gone from our textbooks, yet it is still there today, influencing our kids. But this is where it gets dark. You know, we are calling this the darker side of evolution for a reason. And I will see if I can move myself back out of the way here. You have this guy's images of what evolution looked like for man. And of course, he starts with the gorilla looking creature. You start with number 12 on the bottom right, and on the ones that are black and white. The pictures on the left side of the screen, that's what I'm looking at. I wish I could use my cursor and show you what I'm pointing at. But the ones on the very bottom, number 12, it's numbered with a number 12. They're all facing to the right. And you can see number 11 kind of looks like a Jewish person. Again, this was Nazi Germany. So, of course, the least developed human was a Jewish person. And then you go to number 10, starting to look more ape-like. Number 9, still kind of apish-like, but the mouth sticking out a little further. 8, 7, 6. They start trying to make it look like African Americans, like black people. Number 5, that's pretty much a black person there. And then number 4 is like a Neanderthal. So the black people are before the Neanderthal, according to his drawings. And then number 3 kind of looks like a Hispanic person. Number 2 is your Asian person. And number 1 would be your super race, according to this guy. And they draw out on the right. He's got these little pygmies drawn out, these little people. And these are your missing links. He even has Loch Ness. I think he's the guy. But he drew that before Loch Ness was discovered. I don't know why he's got Loch Ness over there. Maybe he knew more than he was letting on. But he was a racist artist that was using art instead of actual science to express his views. His colleagues even talk about that, how it wasn't scientifically based, but he was a good artist and he was sharing these things. And to become famous, that's what you do. You share your work, you get published, and it goes worldwide. And so they took those images out of our books, but the embryos, those are good. They're not as racist. But this stuff led to a lot of things that we see back in Germany. But even worse, this stuff made its way to America, and you have an incident in the Bronx Zoo where they use those drawings and those ideas of evolution to allow them to take a young child from his family and bring him to America, to the Bronx Zoo, and put him on display. And this is a sad, tragic story. This kid, Otobenga, his teeth were sharpened, and that's what made them think, "Oh wow, this will be a really good kid to put on display." His family, they sharpened their teeth. You know, they did all these tribal things, and they found them living in a remote place, I believe, in Africa. And so they took this guy away from his family and put him on display with a monkey. Thousands upon thousands of people came to see this boy. And that's heartbreaking. He later grew up and had depression issues, obviously, thinking, them treating him like a missing link, putting him in a zoo, and then going, okay, this is wrong. We'll let you go back and into civilization and just see what happens. He ended up killing himself. Extremely sad story, heartbreaking. And Otobenga, you can look that up. It's true. The Bronx Zoo is still there. Cancel culture didn't get after that, nor did they ever take the work of the guy that drew that out of your textbooks. Your kids are seeing work in textbooks that this guy produced, not this guy here, that Ernst Haeckel produced. And it's stuff that would continuously lead to that if Christians, the ones that are being banned and silenced, didn't step up and say something about this. This is obviously a young child, not a missing link. The only difference is his teeth were filed down. And so Haeckel was the guy that did that. There's how you spell his name, Haeckel, Ernst Haeckel. And he claimed, and this is another one of his beliefs, that spontaneous generation must be true. Not because it had been proven in the laboratory, but because otherwise it would be necessary to believe in a creator. So this guy here, he was smart enough to know spontaneous generation would have to be true. Otherwise, there's no way we could get to the amount of life forms we have now. So even though he was racist, he knew enough to know that evolution was impossible. And so he was pushing that idea. But around that time, you have Louis Pasteur, and this guy is debunking that myth that maggots just spontaneously appear when there's dead meat. That's what a lot of people thought. I would think that, something dies with it. You walk away and you come back, and then there's like flies, larvae being let, and there's all this stuff going on so quickly. After something dies, especially out in the wild, you would think that it is spontaneous. But he was the one that helped the pasteurization process come into being. Louis Pasteur. That's what's called pasteurization. And so he actually took a jar, if you're not familiar with that story, of meat that was rotting, left it open, and maggots and flies appeared. Had one of them with a cork on it, nothing happened to it, and then one with a mesh net over top of it, and that's of course where the maggots appeared. You can see how it worked out with the drawings here, but that was good old Louis Pasteur, proving that the thing that Ernst Haeckel said had to be possible or true was impossible. And then one of the evidence that we have right here, and this one just cracks me up, for a common ancestor, is that we all have a similar design. Or not all of us, but a lot of life has a similar design. And so tell your children, if you're a teacher of this, that a lot of people think that it's common ancestry, but common creator cannot be ruled out either. This is something that if you had a creator making life and it's the same creator, he's not going to change the way he's creating. He's not going to go, well, hands are working great. Let me go ahead and just use something totally different. He knows what works. He knows what's going to help that bat fly. He knows what's going to help that person use their hands to grip things, to work, to make things, to do things that no other organism can do. They're going to have these types of hands. And so birds are going to have a certain type of bone that's going to be wrapped in not just skin like the person. It's going to have feathers that grow. Scales don't turn into feathers. Feathers don't turn into scales, like they say. But if an evolutionist were to use those ideas and find a bunch of cars laying around, you could say that they all share a common ancestor. But we know, because we know they're creators, they have more than one creator, and it's mankind. They have a common creator, which is mankind. And so making the tree of life for them doesn't make them spontaneously generated or whatever, and then finding, the evidence right here. Here it is. This was the first car to venture out onto land up here on the top left. And that was those early land cars. They didn't have wheels. They would later evolve those if we if we use that same logic. And so definitely funny logic. If you were to start using that with everything, you could say that, and you could make little geological time scales of these early cars. And we know that rust takes a long time. So the degree of rust means that this one's got to be millions of years old. Um, but yeah, definitely some tinkering and corrupting of all flesh, but not, we don't have changes in kind. Never witnessed it in our lifetime, anything changing its kind. Species of their own can interbreed, and we can have all sorts of variety, but a dog will always be a dog. And here's another term that we have to use in class: analogous structures. These are structures that are different in their design, but they have the same function. So like a bat wing and a bird wing and a penguin wing. The bat and the bird's going to be flying. The penguin wing, it's going to be used for swimming, and the moth wing also for flying. And so they're different in their design, but they have the similar function. Okay, very similar. I guess all these are. I think all of those are for flight. I thought I saw a penguin, but so that's analogous structures, and they say that means we have a common ancestor. So they use these words. It's big words. It's intimidating, and you see those words, and you think, "Wow, somebody's figured that out. They have a big word for it. They must be smart." So it has to be true. There's some more homologous structures. Natural selection, survival of the fittest. This is a big one. This is actually something that does happen. The strongest usually survive, not always. Sometimes you just are blessed to survive. Um, in your situation, the Father helps you. He parts waters for people. They weren't necessarily the strongest. The Egyptians could have been stronger. The Father set them free. Okay, so survival of the fittest, that's one that they push all the time. And they use things like antibiotic resistance because those reproduce really fast. But have we ever seen a bacteria, even as fast as they reproduce, change into anything other than what it already was? No, they're just better versions of themselves. They're the survivors. That is not proof of a change in kind whatsoever. So natural selection, not a creator. There's somewhere they got it wrong. I have to show this. I'm taking a lot of this from my notes in school. But this is where you have fun. When you start looking at the evidence, when you really get deep into the evidence, I encourage you guys to look at the evidence. And that's what we're going to do, because they tell us that horses evolved from this creature called the Eohippus. And we have all these things. But then you look at the one that was in between, the Merychippus, or whatever you call it, and the Pliohippus. I'm forgetting their names because it's been a while since I've done this study. They say, oh, well, the Pliohippus, the one that was right next to the horse, even though there should have been tens of thousands of generations of these things or more before we got to the modern day horse, their skull, it had too deep of facial. Let me make my screen bigger so I can read this. The skull had deep facial fossae, a feature not found in any members of Equus. Additionally, its teeth were strongly curved, unlike the very straight teeth of modern horses. Consequently, it is unlikely to be the ancestor of the modern horse. And so you can rule that one out. And then we start looking. Here's the Eohippus. This little guy. They've propped him up to look like a horse. So he's jumping over a log. Like back then, he was just instinctively doing his little log jump. Um, but there he is, and it looks cool. Looks legit. But you look at the size of this thing. This thing was about knee high to a person. Okay, much smaller than your average horse. And when you look at the fossils, this is where it gets comical. And my kids can point this out. Your kids can see this. Look at all the fish. This is a land animal. What are the chances of this land animal that's going to become a horse dying in the midst of all these fish? Even in the water, I couldn't die around that many fish. And this guy just, I don't know, maybe some fisherman was casting a net and they found him, and then boom. Oh, look, we caught this little horse-like creature. Let's toss him out with the fish and not eat the fish, just let him die. A flood could have caused something like this, but even the flood with all that water, it would still be hard to get that many fish. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fish, I'm counting, around this little guy. That's not where it gets weird. It gets even weirder when you look at what this skeleton reminds me of, and it reminds me of size-wise and shape-wise of a capybara. Have you ever seen those things? A capybara is essentially a giant, like the largest rodent we have, and its habitat is near bodies of water. And if you look at their skeletons look almost identical, and they would be around fish, these little guys. And so I compile a bunch of them, and you look at them, and you start noticing three of these, they all died in the exact same pose. So what are the chances that 3 out of 4 all died in the exact same pose? Two of the 4 were surrounded by fish. So these guys love fish. Maybe they like coexisted with fish. I don't know. And then you got the one in the top center. See if I can find a bigger picture of him because this guy's cool. Let me see. Let me find him. There he is on the right. He actually caught a fish. Like he's like, Mom, look, I caught a fish. And then he died. He's like, he was showing it off, and it's like, oh, sudden death. Didn't get to eat it. The fish didn't lose all of its flesh when it was fossilized. He did. So it caught that fish. It was happy. I don't know. Maybe the fish was trying to save him. Like, hey, buddy, you're gonna drown. Your other buddies keep dying with the exact same pose with fish. You should learn a lesson and not be swimming with the fishes because you're a land animal, you idiot. And so he met the same fate, dying with a lot of fish. So this was Eohippus, one of the first missing links of the horse, they say. Yet all of their specimens are fraudulent. How are they? How do I know they're fraudulent? Because look at them. They died with the exact same pose. All they do is change the outside of them to make it look different. They could have at least not went so crazy with the fish. I don't know who the artist was they hired that day. Was like, add some fish and they'll believe it. You know, they'll believe it died back in the prehistoric times because that's all that existed back then was fish and then this little horse guy. And so their even their toes look that does not look anything like a horse hoof. It looks more exactly like the capybara feet. So that's what this would probably be if this was a real creature. But they had to make fake fossil replicas showing us that it probably wasn't real, or they just took one of those old um, skeletons from the capybara and just modified it like they did the Piltdown Man and said this was the ancestor. Let's break some of the ribs, make it look old. And so just bogus stuff. And they add that long timeline to it to make it seem more realistic. And it just falls apart. And here's one. I thought this was funny. This woman, I don't know if she bought into it, but she has one of these things wearing a horse saddle. So it's kind of comical wearing the little horse saddle, the little capybara. I wonder if those things make good pets. I have no clue.